Hi, Rob.
Hey, Ruchi, how are you?
Good. How about you?
Doing well. Good to see you. Excited for another episode of the Rob and Ruchi Show.
Let's get it. Let's get it. What are we talking about this week?
All right, so we have an interesting topic. The topic is, are leaders ready for this? And essentially, what we talked about in terms of planning for the show today is the new normal. I know that's probably becoming quite passe, but this environment here where leadership practices are different, business is different, the way that we work is different. Are leaders ready for this? And I know we had a couple things we wanted to go over from last episode as well.
Yeah. So I think the shift from last episode to this last episode, we are talking a lot about new leaders. You got a lot of people who, especially during a time like this, when they become new managers, need, I think, a completely different toolkit. But my question this week that I think is really interesting is, what are the new perspectives that are guiding leadership in general? Whether you're a new manager, an experienced manager, a supervisor, part of, a C-suite, how are you thinking fundamentally differently
Mhm.
about your people and the way that your business operates? And for me specifically, I'm quite interested in the idea of your employee value proposition and what people are finding value in now with your company kind of in a time of great emotional turmoil versus before.
Yep, absolutely. So it's a great topic. Lots of stuff happening around this. And I'll tell you one thing that I've noticed, that it's not the traditional list of competencies. You know, those companies that are out there and they have the list of competencies that they've been using for 30 or 40 years. That's
Mhm.
not what's happening here. I'm seeing every single day things like purpose, sustained engagement as foundational capabilities, perspectives of what people are looking for. The other one that I think is interesting, I love to explore with you, is this continued notion of curiosity. And I've
Mm.
talked about that a little bit before. I've read a couple of great books on the topic, and just, are people curious? Are they curious about what they do? Are they curious about their business? Are they curious about their purpose and sustained engagement? So those are some things that we're definitely seeing, new things, most certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. One that I'm seeing a lot of interest around is whether you're remote or whether you're in person, how are you creating an environment of true psychological safety so that your employees can flourish, but also more importantly, I think, so people feel like they can bring the best of themselves to work, without fearing reprisal, without having to hide who they are. And I think we live in a time that is much more accepting than it was in the past in a lot of ways. DEI is forefront in many businesses, kind of priority list, but I don't know that it's a capability or a skill that a lot of people who are shaping systems within a workplace actually understand or have deep knowledge in. And so when I think about psychological safety, one of the things that I think is really crucial when you're developing new perspectives is, what kind of tools and structures and mechanisms are we actually introducing to let people feel safe, to create
Mhm.
that sense of safety and vulnerability and inclusion?
So let me ask you a question. Where we are today, are leaders ready for this? How do you think it's going in terms of almost this organic, non thought process behind the creation of safe zones for doing work? And the reason I ask you this, Ruchi, is that I've been astounded by the feedback that I have been getting from leaders about working remotely. The
Mhm.
fact that this system, the fact that there's a camera, the fact that there's this almost artificial wall of safety here has allowed people to feel more comfortable. The other thing that has blown me away, and I really have to think through this, I know you want to think through this, is how uncomfortable some work environments are that you just don't even know. And as a leader myself, thinking about, oh, going into a conference room and closing the door, or
Mhm.
hey, we need to have a meeting in my office, or
Mhm.
hey, something as simple as let's go grab a cup of coffee and maybe a drink. What does that do to that culture of safety. And now when all of those things are taken out of the equation, how much more safe can people be in this environment?
I think you raise an interesting point there, Rob. I think there's two things. There's one are the things that we're realizing were actually not safe about our previous paradigm, right? And then two is what are we maybe still leaving on the table thinking things are okay now because we're not in the same physical environment? Because one of the things that I think is really interesting is considering in a virtual environment, how do you translate some of that like tone and body language safety that you get from people, that confirmation that someone's picking up what you're throwing down,
Yeah.
or the idea that you can hide a little bit in an in-person environment if you need to take your time, especially neurodivergent individuals. Virtual environments are actually like a lot scarier for some of them and a lot more high stress because you have to think much more quickly. There's less accommodation and variation to how you can actually contribute. And, you're dealing with people who aren't experts on how to actually deal with you virtually.
Yeah.
Everyone's learning and feeling it all along.
And they're getting a lot better at it. I had a very candid conversation with a very senior level leader at one of our pharmaceutical clients. We were doing a what we call a customizing interview, building a new simulation. We're talking about what's happening in the world of pharmaceuticals, their business, and so forth. And one of the things she said was really interesting. She said, one of the new leadership capabilities that I'm working on is understanding, are people actually really paying attention to me
Mm,
in these virtual meetings, or are they looking into their screen, acting like they're paying attention, but they're actually working on something else?
mm,
The other thing that she said was fascinating was, and this comes back to the safety zone, what are they all really saying behind my back? Are they looking and smiling, but yet they're all having separate, teams chats to the side, or are they texting on their phone about, oh, she's an idiot. I can't believe that she's saying that we have to go down this path and that path. And it's a whole different level of psychological safety that's being created or not created there.
yeah, I don't know. I find that so fascinating because I think it reveals uh, what I would say is probably embedded ideologies from even before the time that we moved to virtual. I feel if you have those kind of insecurities in a virtual environment, likely those existed when you were in person
Mm-hmm.
and now they're just exacerbated by having less of a line of sight, which I actually think reveals something about your own leadership style. If you are feeling those worries, that means that you are not 100% confident in your team. Something needs to change. And so it's less about, well, it is still about creating psychological safety for your team because chances are they're probably feeling that tension,
Yeah.
but it's also about how do you as a leader dial down the paranoia and feel secure in knowing that your team is going to be there and do their jobs, even if you're not in kind of the traditional overseeing environment that you were before.
Right. And some of the traditional things play into this. So she was a new leader
Mm,
to this company. She'd been leading for 25 plus years, but
mm,
was heavily recruited, brought
mm,
into this senior role.
mm,
She's changing things around in a changed
mhm,
environment. And,
mm.
clearly she was probing and asking me questions about, do other people like at my level feel this level of insecurity? It's interesting.
I think probably like a lot of businesses who are going through transformations, and having to go through the valley of despair and all of those parts of a change management process, but doing it virtually, are probably feeling a lot of angst, right? Like, how do you message cohesively? How do you get the finger on the pulse? How do you create these environments where people can bring their best selves to work if you yourself are not able to connect in a
Yeah.
fundamental way? And so I think there's a couple of things I would suggest from an
Yeah.
instructional standpoint that I've seen has helped. One is just creating structure around how you connect.
Yep.
So thinking about like where and when are you connecting with individuals? Is it actually marked in your calendar? Are you offering opportunities for people to feed back directly to you? Are you feeding back directly to others? Are there pulse surveys? What official structures and mechanisms
So
do you
yeah, so let me ask you a question. This is great, and the
have?
purpose of our show is to share, insights into what's happening. What are some things that leaders can take away? So what would you suggest? So yes, creating that structure for connection.
Mhm.
How do leaders do that? How do they communicate that? How do they create those structures? What are some tips?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one very simple one is a simple pulse survey.
Mm,
Ask 3 to 4 questions around how people are feeling, how many hours they're spending on their work, how much value they feel the work is doing. Any other question that you feel taps into some cultural implications, do that regularly. Analyze the data, share the data back, and have frank discussions about it.
And something we talked about earlier, something I know is a passion for you, is this work giving me purpose? Am I
Mhm.
working for a company that has purpose? And so maybe part of that poll survey is it's almost a purpose check-in.
Absolutely. I love that idea. And I think, it makes people believe that you care about something beyond just getting productivity out of them.
Mhm. Or money, or just generating revenue. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think another structure that a leader can implement is just simple check-ins, right? So, depending on your level of seniority, this might cascade down, but people need consistent face-to-face contact or voice-to-voice contact. And you need to be able to say on a weekly, bi-weekly, even monthly basis, here's where the company is, here's where your business unit is, here's where your role is. How are you feeling? What are your
Mhm.
worries? You need to feel
Yeah.
heard. And more importantly, I think you need to have metrics for success. So
I
I think,
was I was just going to say that it has to go hand in hand. You
yeah,
can't just have those check-ins and have conversations without real metrics that you're aligned to, you have goals with, and that's the critical part of the conversation.
I really like Amy Edmondson. I don't know if you've ever seen her work, but I
Yes.
think she's very reliable if you're trying to go to specifically a psychological safety element of culture and say, like, are we creating at its foundational level an environment where people feel like they're bringing their best to the workplace? They feel like they can be heard. They feel like if they mess up, they're not going to be ostracized or fired.
Yep.
I think if you can get people agreeing to all of those statements and say, I agree, I feel included, I feel psychologically safe, you are going to start getting the best of their work.
That's great. Okay, that's a good one. What's another one?
Specifically on the structures.
No, that on another tip. So structures, I feel good on, and I'm writing these down because you're giving me great ideas for a blog. So are leaders ready? So structured conversations, structured connections. What else?
Modeling.
Modeling. Tell me more.
Modeling is huge, right? If we think about how change happens, modeling is like number one, the one you have the most control over, and the thing that people are influenced the most as
Yeah.
a result of.
So I'm a leader and I'm
Hmm.
struggling in this new environment. And so one of the things that I really need to do is I need to show and walk the talk. I
Hmm.
need to be the one that's out there saying, okay, listen, everybody, this has changed. This is our new strategy. These are our new customers. This is our new delivery system.
Hmm.
I'm going to be right here and let me show you how to do this.
Hmm.
That goes back, it's interesting because not only is that part of classic leadership slash management, know-how, but now when you fold in the new environment, it really becomes more critical, I think.
Well, and some of the best leaders I've ever worked for, I have a manager who does this very, very well. She constantly models the kind of vulnerability um, and rigor she wants to see from us. So she will
Hmm.
never ask of us something that she has not done
Yep.
or helped us do in the past. And that
Yep.
for a lot of us helps create a sense of trust where there isn't always trust. A lot of times people don't change their behavior, not because they don't want to or because they don't know how. Those are like easy problems to solve. But if they don't trust you, there's nothing that's going to make them change their behavior.
That's right. And to that point, delegating work that you as a leader don't want to do because it's beneath you or you're too busy for it,
Yeah.
that's not trust.
Yeah.
That's throwing stuff over the fence. That's not modeling the behavior.
I think a lot about Stephen Covey and how he talks about, just there are priorities. There are big rock priorities,
Yes.
pebbles, sand, and water. I think the major big rock priority for leaders in a time like this, especially if you're trying to work on culture, is actually spending the time dedicated time modeling behaviors you want to see. And it's the first thing that will fall on the wayside because you don't want to do those things.
Mhm.
You want other people to do them. But if people cannot see you doing them, how are they going to do it to the best of their ability?
We probably have time for one more. So you
Mhm.
you gave me two really good ones. Let me throw one out for you.
Yeah.
How about this thing called the strategic mindset
Mm.
in terms of what am I supposed to do? How do I do this? There's short-term things. There's, great. Let's model behaviors. Let's structure our connections. Let's do all those things. But there's also that long term. There's also how do I have that strategic mindset to understand where are we going? Where are we going with purpose? Where are we going to create an impact on the world with what we're doing? Does
Mm.
that resonate? I'm just curious your thoughts.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's so hard for people who are on the front line often to like think with a strategic mindset, not because they can't, but because they're not always allowed the space or time.
Yeah,
You can think strategically about like the next thing you're doing or how to kind of put a new process into place, but less about the business strategy
yeah.
and how you play into it. So I think leaders really have the responsibility to connect frontline workers and their direct reports to a greater purpose.
So a follow up on that, we're in the process of designing one of the most innovative simulations I've ever done. It's
Mm.
called the Multifunctional Organization Sim, where we're actually going to have participants run a function for 1 year at a time and move to the next function and move to the
Mm.
next function and move to the next function. And what just struck me about what you said is, sure, I can see in front of me the things that I have to do, but
Mm.
how about that empathy for others? Strategic mindset of what I'm doing is helping this other function or this other group or this other person do what they need to do so that when we're collaborating, we're achieving that purpose. We're achieving that ability to win together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like the shift that I would see is, who's invited to the table? What kind of
Mhm.
meetings are you having? Where are you sharing these kind of priorities and where you want to go? How's the roadmap messaged? How often can people feed back on it and really think about their own role? Like, I think the other thing that is huge for leaders to think about in conjunction with this is like the secession plan that they're thinking of, or the bench they're
Oh,
building,
yeah.
right? Like, if we want to get to X place by 2023, what do we need to have in place to get us there?
Then that I believe is a topic for another day because
Yeah.
we could spend 15 minutes on that. And coincidentally, I'm leading a session later this week where we're looking at the business acumen impact of a
Mm.
CEO turnover.
Awesome. Well,
Yeah.
for next time then.
All right, Ruchi, it is great to see you. Thank
You
you as
too, Rob.
always. You gave me ideas. I hope I gave you ideas, but more importantly,
Absolutely.
we hope that we gave all of our viewers some ideas. We're growing the folks who are watching us. So if you do have any comments or want to contact us, please feel free to do so.
And if you have any burning topics on the top of your mind, please comment as well.
Excellent. All right, Ruch. Thanks. We'll see
Thanks.
you again soon.
Thanks, Rob.